So hi, good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Kieran Quinn. I'm the Research Support Librarian here at Maynooth. So I'm just going to talk about publishing your research open access, the options. So the outline is going to be this: what do we mean by open access? Is it beneficial to the researcher? What the routes into open access are, how to identify open access journals and the issue of predatory journals. And then open access and funder requirements. This is a big issue at the moment. Obviously, there's a lot of pressure from funders to publish open access. And is there a cost to publishing open access? And then just the concept of journal prestige and open access. This is often a concern amongst academics if they, there will be a prestige in publishing in certain journals, and if they're not available open access, what do they do basically? How do they make that choice? And then just a bit on open journal publishing, which is a fairly new development. Okay, I should just get that out of the way. Okay, so just to find, if some of you aren't really that familiar with open access, just what is open access? So basically, it's the free, unrestricted online access to research outputs such as journal articles and books, and it's open to all with no access fees. This is the basic thing about it. It's a lot of research is publicly funded, and there's a sense that it should be open to everybody without having a paywall or a subscription fee to pay to view the articles. And there are two main routes to making research outputs openly accessible. So one involves publishing articles or books via an open access route on a publisher's platform. So this is often called gold open access. So this is where it could be, the journal publishes open access, but the requirement is you have to pay to get published. So there'll be a certain charge, which will vary depending on the journal, to make your article immediately open access. And then the other main route would be green open access. And this is where you would self-archive. So you would deposit your manuscript in, for example, an institutional repository or subject repository, and make your work available that way. Of course, that often comes with certain restrictions due to copyright and so on, but I'll get on to that. But they're the two main routes anyway: gold open access and green open access. And just to mention open science as well, because this is one you often hear mentioned as well, and sometimes actually they're used kind of interchangeably. Sometimes you'll see, they refer to open science for journals, but that actually also means social sciences and humanities as well. But it's a similar kind of a term, but the aim is the same: to make primary outputs of publicly funded research results, publications and research data publicly accessible in digital format with no or minimal restriction. And actually that area of research data is another one. I won't kind of really get it into here, but you'd often see that as well as a requirement of funding. That it's not just publishing the article open access, it's also making the research data available as well. That's often a funder requirement. And there's a graphic that you can have a look at, and that'll kind of explain that process. And I got that one from Foster Open Science, which is very useful learning platform if you're interested in open data and so on. And just fair data as well. This is something that you'll often hear mentioned as well. And when people are depositing their data, maybe in a repository, there is a requirement from a lot of funders that it's fair. So this is kind of an approach that a lot of funders are adopting. And the premise behind that is it's findable, so that people are going to be able to actually find the data. So there's a good metadata in there. So that's metadata is data about data. So you have the data described well, so it's searchable. That it's accessible. Okay, so it's going to be understandable to humans and machine, and it's going to be in a trusted repository. So somewhere secure that that data is going to be archived for a certain duration, and that people will be able to access it. That it's interoperable. So for example, you might put your metadata in a format that people are going to be able to use. So that could be, I don't know, maybe free software or some sort of software that is easily available for people, and that it's reusable as well. So it'll be licensed in such a way that people will be able to use that data as they progress. But I just thought I'd mention that just because it's often a concept that's mentioned when you're talking about, open access, open data, the whole idea of fair. Okay, so what is driving open access? Why suddenly, not even suddenly, but why the big move to open access? So there's a few different sources. So governments are pushing it. There is that sense that a lot of research is publicly funded, and if people have access to it, it'll improve research and innovation, and thereby they'll get better value for money. So rather than some of the government pay for the research and then it's hidden behind a paywall, that people actually have to pay to get access to the published articles on that research. There's universities and university libraries. So for lots of reasons, but a main one would be, for example, to access and to share your research so other people can read your work. that might encourage collaborations and so on, but better value again to share your research. And also the idea of the double dip. You hear that from university libraries, and the idea of that is that maybe the academic submits the paper for nothing to the journal, possibly just peer reviews for that journal as well, and then a university library has to pay the same company to get access to that research back again for their students. So it seems a bit of a crazy kind of a situation that that the public fund the research and then you give it away to the publisher and then you should pay to get it back again. So this is the idea of the double dip. Then there is open access publishers, and just the couple I've mentioned here would be PLOS, which is Public Library of Science in America, and Biomed Central, and they are what you would call gold open access. So they publish all their papers open access, but people pay for that privilege. Now, they do have certain, they will reduce rates for certain people depending on the situation and so on, but basically it's a pay system. You pay in advance and they publish your work golden access. Then there are also subscription journals that charge article processing charges, and this is the so-called hybrid open access. So there will be a traditional publisher, their subscriptions, if you like, are behind a paywall, but if you want your article to be available open access, you pay an article processing charge. And that's where the various open access deals that have been developed recently come in, and that kind of waives that. So, when you're subscribing to a journal, say a library, for example, the cost of the APC will be covered as well, but more on that later. So basically there's the gold open access and then the hybrid open access. Would be a couple of options there. Funders are pushing it. So for example, the Horizon 2020 from the EU, again, very strong sense there that they're funding a lot of research and yet it ends up behind a paywall. So they're stipulating now, as a lot of funders are, that if you're going to accept their funding, that you have to make your work available open access. And then researchers themselves, there will be a certain ethos there, that a democratization of information, that it would be good for other academics worldwide, not just academics who maybe work in a few privileged universities that can pay for access, get access to the information, but that everybody should be able to get access. And also then the sense that, if you increase the readership of your papers, the logic would be it'll increase the number of citations, and thereby, your research impact should increase as well. And that's kind of controversial, but on balance, that seems to work out, and it varies by subject area, but that seems to be a thing that, more people are reading your papers, you will get more citations. So that's all good for your career. And researchers would often be involved in self-archiving, for example, in green open access. And that's a thing a lot of academics would do, whether that's the paper, when it's first published, depending on their copyright, or it could be after the embargo is over, or they could put in, an accepted version of the manuscript. There are several ways to actually self-archive using green open access. And then that can be in an institutional or a disciplinary archive. So some disciplines, for example, would have a tradition of publishing a lot of open access. So there's one there for physics, A or XIV, and that would be kind of the place to go for a lot of physicists, experimental physics, that kind of thing. They would put a lot of their work straight into A or XIV. But again, that is the tradition, I suppose, in their subject area. Okay, so there's some of the forces behind it, I suppose, pushing along open access. Then just at a national level, I just want to mention, so in Ireland, for example, in 2012, they published Ireland's National Principles on Open Access, and that favors green open access. So that's depositing into an institution repository. It's kind of the governmental option. And then from that, there's a thing called NORF, the National Open Research Forum, which was established in 2017 to drive the Irish agenda for open research. And I have a link, and I can circulate these slides anyway, so there's a link there into their forum. You'll see what's involved there. And in 2019, they produced the National Framework on the Transition to Open Research. And that's the link there into the Digital Repository Ireland, where you can have a look at that document. Post kind of related to all this as well, there is a platform, hopefully it'll be there for a while longer, called RIAN. So this is a national portal of the open access portals in Ireland. So that would include the university portals, and also for some government bodies, for example, Línas for the Health Service, and Teagasc, Bordís Cívara, and a few others. And that would include, so in Maynooth's case, for example, would include a lot of publications from academics, PhD, research masters. They would all be with their full text. And then there's national agreements as well with publishers. Okay, so in the case of Ireland, it's the Irish Research e-Library, IRL, and that's from 2020 onwards. And they are the kind of so-called transformative agreements. So the idea is that, there will be a certain amount of papers will be published automatically. The processing charges will be waived when you publish with these certain publishers. And again, I'll go into that a bit more in detail. And actually there's a talk on that later in the week, I think on Thursday. There's a session on about the transformative agreements that you might be interested in. And then open access books. This is something else that's developing. So DCU, for example, has a press now, and they have open access university press for publishing certain books, open access, not everything, but it's starting, you know, it's a thing that's in motion. So hopefully that'll evolve and develop for other universities as well. So that's just kind of at a national level, what's going on. And in the case of Maynooth, so Maynooth was the first to establish an open access repository in 2003, and that's managed by the library. It's called Mural, and you'll see a link to that on the library homepage on the bottom left. You'll see a link into Mural. And we've had a mandate in Maynooth from 2008, it was revised in 2017 and again in 2021, and that's based on the national principles for open access. And there is strong support within Maynooth to provide free online access to the university's research to maximize the visibility and dissemination of our research. And the open access policy requires that all research and scholarly publications which arise in whole or in part from research carried out at the university and subject to the copyright archiving policies of the publisher be made available at the earliest possible date through Mural. So you need to bear that in mind, I suppose, if you're publishing. But the proviso being, of course, researchers have the freedom to publish first wherever they feel is the most appropriate, regardless of publishers' policies on open access. Okay, but there will be a support there to, you know, be encouraged to use those that support open access. Okay. And just on the funders' requirements, so Horizon 2020, part of that was an open research data pilot, and they were stipulating that open access should be provided as soon as possible, in any case no later than 6 months, and that is quite soon actually in a lot of cases for publications, but or 12 months in the case of social sciences and humanities. But I think with a lot of funders there is a kind of a bit of wiggle room in that, because sometimes, you know, the embargo, for example, could be longer than that, though I suppose you could always opt for, you know, an accepted manuscript version. It doesn't have to be necessarily the final published version that has to go up in, maybe, for example, an institution repository. But just, you know, pay attention, depending on what funder you're using, just have a look at their terms and conditions. And a lot of them, they will have them now. They've certainly the last year or two, a lot of them have been developing open access policies, so you can see that on their various websites. And so an electronic copy of the publication must be deposited in a suitable green open access repository. Version will generally be the author's postprint or the final accepted version after the refereeing process taking place. And if it's a gold open access route is chosen, a copy must also be self-archived in a repository to ensure long-term preservation of the article. Okay, need to bear that in mind. But actually, you'll see some of the funders where they don't really approve of pure golden access. They're more accepting of, say, a hybrid model, you know, where it could be part of one of the agreements that's made with the publishers, rather than you actually paying money to have it made open access. Though actually in some cases you might have, you know, funding available for that within your research funding. It really varies between the funders, so you just need to check that closely. And to help you with that, this is quite a handy database. It's called Sherpa Juliet, and you can go into this and look up your funder, and they'll lay out then exactly what the requirements are, what the policy is of that particular funder. So for example, this is what the one for, say, Science Foundation Ireland would look a bit like. And you can see that it'll give you the requirements, open access publishing, general open access policies, and so on. So fairly straightforward and well worth your while. Go in and have a close look at those and just see exactly what is required. And just another force that you might have come across is Plan S. And this is a coalition, an international consortium of research funders. And that developed the plan, so they came about in 2018, but from 2021 and then put forward to 2020, sorry, initially 2020 and then 2021. Scientific publications that result from research funded by public grants must be published in compliant open access journals or platforms. And again, they're saying scientific there, but that would include other subject areas as well. You know, basically anything that is funded from those groups, they would expect it to be made available open access. And I say, you know, it is a bit off-putting, this constant use of science, but that's just the way it's evolved. And funders that support it include Science Foundation Ireland, World Health Organization, UK Research Wellcome Trust. You know, there's a lot of them involved in this. And again, I have links in there to the site. You can have a closer look at that. And just for compliance, for example, with Plan S, there's 3 main routes. So publication in fully open access journals and platforms, or deposited versions author accepted manuscripts in open access repositories without embargo and licensed with Creative Commons licenses. If you're not familiar with those, actually I have a little link into that, and you can go down and you can have a look at different licenses. So these are the different options, which again will vary, you know, depending on your funder. And you'll often find in the universities, you know, there might be a favored one that the university would have, and you can check that out and just see which is the one that's preferred. So that is that. So that's the Creative Commons. And they also mentioned, as I kind of just mentioned earlier, publication in hybrid journals, which is open access within a subscription journal, only under transformative agreements. So in the Plan S case, they're not fans of gold open access unless it's part of a transformative agreement. So one of the agreements that's been, you know, negotiated by Ireland and the universities. Okay, so they're kind of tricky, but you know, the details are all laid out, so you should be able to navigate them fairly easily. And here's some more to the Plan S principles. Again, similar kind of things. Authors, institution retain copyright of the publication. And of course, this is a big advantage of open access, that you keep the copyright using a Creative Commons license. So funders, high quality open access journals. Okay, so there's incentive there is to encourage more open access. So just generally, you know, it's the same kind of principles I've just mentioned really. And there's the hybrid one mentioned again. And encouraging, you know, agreements and arrangements towards open access. Now, this is a handy little tool that's available now from Plan S as well, where you can actually go in and check if a journal is Plan S compliant. And you have some options there. You can search by journal, by funder, or by institution, and send that in, and they'll tell you whether that journal is compliant or not. So that's a handy one to know about. Okay, so onto the benefits. So there's all this, obviously there's all this kind of, I suppose, push factor, you know, to get you to publish your work open access. And as I mentioned that it's coming from a range of different sources. So what are the benefits? Well, there's quite a few of them, as it turns out. So these are just some of the ones you could list here. For example, broadening worldwide access to material. That's all good, you know. Global South appreciates being able to access a lot of these resources, you know, rather than your research just being accessible to maybe, you know, Northern Europe and America, Australia, you know, Northern Africa, maybe, you know, a lot of countries will be excluded. So this is a great way of getting your work out there and maybe establishing, you know, collaborations and citations, increasing citations for your research material, method of preserving material. So if it is, for example, in a repository, it's going to be well protected. Making material easier to access from search engines. So for example, the open access repositories, they'll all be harvested from Google Scholar. So obviously people worldwide searching Google Scholar would be linked into your work. Raising the profile of Irish researchers internationally. So again, like a lot of Irish researchers, some of them do publish in the big peer-reviewed international journals. A lot of others might be publishing in, you know, maybe more local Irish-based journals that wouldn't necessarily be, for example, indexed in the bigger sort of citation databases like Scopus or Web of Science. Actually, in line with those, I should mention as well that they tend to only index the gold open access. Okay, so they're not going to index open access that hasn't been paid for as such. You know, so just be aware of that. You know, they do have a lot of open access in there, but it's not complete by any means. And so raising profile researchers and complying with institutional and funder mandates. So there are a lot of mandates out there, as I mentioned, so it's often a requirement, but I think it's also just a good thing to do from the point of view of your impact and the general kind of, you know, getting the research out there, making it available to people. Here's a nice little graphic just to emphasize it again. More exposure from your work. Practitioners can apply your findings. So people working in the field. So that could be people, just for example, not necessarily, you know, in an institution, academic institution that has access to a lot of these resources. They might be just working in the field, and it'll mean they can also access your work and use it in their teaching and in their, you know, their practice. Higher citation rates, more on that at the end, but generally the feeling seems to be that, actually the figures seem to back up that because the readership is increased, you will get higher citation rates. Okay. Research can influence policy. So again, if you're maybe government bodies doing research, again, they'll be able to access your papers. So you might start to have an influence on policy papers. So that's all good. And that's all part of that bigger kind of, you know, impact that you might hear about, you know, impact beyond citations. societal impact, cultural impact, all that kind of thing. And the public can access your finding as well. So, you don't have to be a professional academic researcher to be interested in research areas. So the public will be able to get access. And of course, they pay for it as well through their taxation and public funding for research. So it's good that they can access it. Compliant with grant rules, and obviously taxpayers getting value for money. So, not only will, for example, your research be used in an academic environment, it'll also be used maybe in a broader commercial environment. Which obviously will improve maybe the economy or cultural situation, anything like that. Researchers in developing countries can see your work as well. So lots of benefits, And here's some more. This is just a link into, we have a guide in Maynooth on this as well, and there's more benefits listed out in there. And it mentions here actually as well, just the benefits from Maynooth as well. It's a showcase of Maynooth publications, raise the profile of Maynooth research internationally. Okay. And then a space as well, of course, for individual research groups, schools and colleges to display their research, and increases the potential for collaborations and synergies between Irish and international researchers. So all good, I think, will be the conclusion there. And here's some more. This is just from a group called Spark Europe, and this is directed by, it's kind of, I suppose, a group that promotes open access, but it's directed by European research libraries. And again, they will be mentioning things like researchers and their institutions benefit from having the widest possible audience. Research benefits, latest techniques can be easily used, so have access to that. Breakthroughs coming from unexpected places. So the idea that, other people can access your research and make use of it or adapt it in a certain way. You wouldn't necessarily be thinking that your research could be used in a certain way, but if there's more access to it, people will think of ways to use it. Funders invest in research to advance human knowledge and ultimately improves human lives. And again, if your work is getting out there, it can be used by anyone, including industry and society. So much bigger usage for your research. And even the best ideas remain just that until they are shared, until they can be utilized. So again, reinforcing that idea that the broader, your research gets out there, the more valuable it is, the more use will be made of it. So this is just to try and, I suppose, back up. These are some studies that have been done to say, is the advantage real? Because you do hear people saying that a lot. Well, of course, it's beneficial, the more readership, the more citations. But I mean, it'd be nice to get a bit of, facts and figures behind that, because, for example, in different subject areas, so say the sciences, for example, they publish a lot more and they cite a lot. That's just how they work. Humanities, they would probably, publish less and cite even less. So it's just interesting to see the figures and just see, how it comes out between the different subject areas. But roughly, it seems to be that it benefits the sciences more. It's very good for the social sciences as well. Probably not so good for the humanities, but on the other hand, it does increase readership hugely. So, but this is just one I saw. There's a systematic review of the citation of open access and subscription-based articles. So I thought that'd be interesting. It's kind of newish. And that's the trouble with a lot of these is you'd be looking for studies, and a lot of them are quite old at this stage, and it's all developed so much. It'd be good to see like a much more up-to-date one. But this one, upshot kind of is, they think, barring, bias and all the usual things you'd mentioned in a piece of research, they reckon it's about a 47.8% citation advantage in publishing open access. And they reckon about 27% they couldn't discern any particular advantage. But they do say they'd need to, some of it's kind of inconclusive because it's focused on multiple disciplines. That thing of trying to figure out exactly how it works out for different subject areas. But on balance, it seems to be beneficial that there is a definite and pronounced citation advantage. So, worth your while publishing open access seems to be the conclusion there. And this is a slightly older one then as well, by Spark, that I just mentioned. That hasn't been updated since 2015. But they would see that they have, at that point, they were saying 46 of the studies had an advantage, 17 no advantage. So quite similar actually to the figures above. So on balance, you're seeing it quite significant. Now, hopefully there'll be something a bit more definite out, maybe a newer study that could show that more conclusively, especially as, more and more material becomes available open access. You should be able to get a clearer picture. Okay, so routes into open access. So now that you've decided that, open access is the way to go, how do you go about publishing open access? So as I kind of mentioned, I'll go into a bit more detail. You can see it here in this little infographic. Open access. So this is the gold route. So this is where you pay the article processing charge and you have immediate open access in the publisher. The green route is you publish in a subscription-based journal, and you have options there. So you can either deposit it in your institutional repository, whatever version of that might be. That could be an embargo, you might have to delay it. It might be just an accepted version you can put in, or some different version added to the one that's actually published. Or you could go off here into a hybrid journal and pay an article processing charge and get the immediate. So that's just another way, I suppose, into gold open access, if you like. Now, the nice little interloper here, of course, is, as I'll come on to, is the open access agreements, the transformative agreements. So there are a lot of waivers available now, depending on the journal, obviously, but there's a lot of deals struck with the publishers that charge gets waived for a certain percentage of publications that go into it. So there are ways, but basically you're still at that gold or green route. So just to mention again, so the green is the traditional one. So after publication, a version of the article is also placed in an open access institutional repository or a subject repository, whichever suits you best. This is called self-archiving because publications are registered by authors themselves. So the author is putting the paper into the archive, and they put in whatever version they're allowed to put in, so whether that's, say, the accepted version, or they wait until after the embargo has passed, and then they can put in the published version. And this is one called Sherpa Juliet, or Sherpa Romeo. The other one was Sherpa Juliet, but this is Sherpa Romeo. And this is where you can look up publishers' copyright policies and self-archiving. And actually, if you're doing that in Maynooth and submitting articles into Mural, people in there will check all that for you as well. So don't be worried about that. We can help you with that to check the copyrights if you're self-archiving. But that Sherpa Romeo website is quite handy for that. And Maynooth repository itself, just to mention it briefly, this is the Maynooth University Research Archive Library, and that's the contact there for Mural at mu.ie or Susan Redmond-Rolocco at mu.ie for any queries on that. And just to mention, Mural is the institutional repository for Maynooth University and St. Patrick's College. Okay, and again, the idea is to show, to disseminate your work and increase the impact for Maynooth. And you can actually, just mentioning impact, if your work is actually deposited in there, like this is an overall one for the repository, but you can do this individually as well. So if you wanted to see and be able to show maybe an application for funding or a job application, the amount of interest in your papers and the number of downloads, you can produce these little graphics as well. Okay, and you can see a huge amount of activity, huge amount of downloads. It's 100% full text and 100% open access. So there's a lot of activity on this site. So I think well worth your while, putting your papers in there. Okay. And this is a guide for this. You'll find this in the guides on the library webpage. And it'll bring you through that. This is the Mural Institutional Repository Guide. It'll bring you through everything you need to know, how to deposit, why you should deposit, how to cite items in Mural, copyright and licensing. It's all there. And there's the Mural team down there as well. So loads of help available on that. Okay, and if for some reason, you'll find in some subject areas, people like to deposit as well in subject repositories. And this is a directory of open access repositories. So and this is worldwide, it's a global directory. So you can have a look in there and just see what repositories are out there if you wanted to deposit your work into one of those. Okay. And I say these slides should be available, so you can be able to just link into those. So gold open access. So two ways into gold open access. So gold, you think gold is you're paying or somebody is paying. So full gold open access is all publications are freely accessible to readers immediately and without restrictions. No subscription fees, and publishers gain their income by charging authors or other institutions when articles are accepted. And these are known as article processing charges. Okay. This variant of open access is generally referred to as full gold open access or pure gold open access, distinguished from hybrid open access. So what they mean by that is that, a lot of traditional journals will be subscription based, and they've evolved into offering open access on their sites if the author pays for upfront. Whereas there will be other open access ones that are just open access, for example, PLOS or Biomed Central. And they exist by authors paying to publish their work open access immediately. So they're similar, but just slight variations, I suppose, on a theme. And the hybrid one, as I mentioned, this is the variant of gold open access. And this is probably the most common one you'll come across. You'll submit an article into Taylor and Francis or Elsevier or whatever it happens to be. And they're a subscription-based companies, and they'll be looking for article processing charges to publish your journal article open access. Okay, and I say that's where the agreements come in. So a lot of the articles in those journals would still be behind a paywall, but if you pay for open access, yours will be available open access. But I say hopefully yours will be covered by the transformative agreements. Okay, there's that. And to come on to the IRL Transformative Open Access Agreement. So this is IRL, which is the Irish Research Electronic Library, and they've negotiated along with the universities various deals with our agreements with publishers. And Minister Harris was delighted about this. So, and this is May 2021. So this is a great initiative. And just mentioning there that, you know, until now research funded by taxpayers was frequently behind paywalls and only accessible to those with expensive subscriptions. Okay, so they're very keen to make work available open access. Okay, actually, I'll go into that. I can show you a bit of that. So this is just the section in IRL, and they have a full listing in there, as we do on our own guides, of all the publishers they've struck deals with so far, and you can go in and have a look at those. Okay, depending on, you know, what one you might be interested in. So lots of publishers in there, and then when you go into them, so for example, if you're interested in, say, Taylor and Francis, and click into it, and it'll tell me immediately what content, and it's worth checking this because you'll need to just go in and check, you know, it's not all journals, you know, so you just need to go in and check those and see what the deal is. And there's the agreement period, the universities that are participating, and there's a quota per year. A lot of them work to different levels. So for example, 2021, it's capped at 217 articles. So a tip would be to get in early. If you find yourself prone to publishing early in the year, it's probably a good idea, because at least you'll get in ahead of the race as such. You know, later in the year, there's more of a chance that the quota has run out. Okay, and you can see that that agreement was based around 56% project. So they're obviously basing it on, you know, how many articles were previously being published with Taylor and Francis from the participating universities, and they're waiving charges on a percentage of that. So it'll be the first, you know, 50-60% of the total that'll get their charges waived. So depending on who your, you know, your kind of journal of choice might be, you can go in and have a look at the agreements and just see what the terms and conditions are. Okay, tell you who's eligible, article types, and also then publishing licenses. If you're interested in that, you can go in and look at, you know, what exactly is going to happen here. You know, if I publish with them, how does that work out? So that is that. So just go back in. So I'd be happy to take questions at the end. And just remind you, on Thursday as well, there's a further session with a lot more detail on those transformative agreements. And the IRL requirements, so this is obviously people who negotiated it. The agreements should cover both the read costs and the publication costs. So that's great. So that gives access to the users in the libraries, as well as waives the charges for the academics. So that's all good news. And all articles from corresponding authors based in members should be immediately open access and publication at no additional cost outside the agreement. So there should be no additional costs. So when you submit your article, you have an option to go open access. That'll come automatically into the library, and then that'll be, you know, verified, go back to the publisher. So there should be no costs to you once those are being waived. If it's for some reason, for example, the quota has run out, the library will let you know that's run out, and then you can kind of think of maybe another way, maybe go green open access or something, but you shouldn't be getting charged for it. And open access public authors are available across all the publishers' titles, including hybrid titles. Okay, so that's the aim of it. And that's just the guide we have up as well, open access agreements, which looks like, oh, actually, yeah, so this one. Yeah, so we have them laid out. So as they come in, then we just add them in. So it's just a handy way of clicking through them and just seeing what the agreements are about. It's kind of a shorter version than the IRL one, but handy for just a quick glance if you wanted to. So you see here, Elsevier, for example, now the quota has run out for this year. So there'll be a new one in 2021 or 22, I should say. Okay, so that is the open access agreements. And again, you can check, you know, publishers' copyright policies and self-verifying. So for example, if you fall through the cracks on that, or the journal you're interested in isn't covered, you can go in and have a look at the journal you intend publishing in and just see if there's any way you can publish another way. So green open access, basically. And if you're looking more generally for open access journal titles, a good place to start is the directory of open access journals, which looks like that. And you can go in there and just search for open access journals in there. You could look at something like Scopus, but just to bear in mind, they don't include everything that's in this directory. They're only including the gold ones, so ones that have been paid for from somewhere, whether it's from the author or from agreements and waivers. So it's not a complete list. So just to be aware of that. But on the other hand, it's a good way of checking, doing kind of a quality control check. Even though the journals in here are good journals, Scopus is much more rigorous. Okay. And you can also look at something like Directory of Open Access Scholarly Resources, which is that one. Web of Science as well. They would also pull in the gold journals from the Directory of Open Access. And then just examples there of open access journal published. So Biomed Central, Chemistry Central, Frontiers, Public Library of Sciences, PeerJ. They're all, I suppose, pure open access journals, and they would be generally, I think they're all gold. You pay a fee for that. Okay. So just to mention, and I'm going to come on to now, there's a lot of considerations you might want to, kind of balance up when you're deciding how to publish open access, because obviously you have to weigh, I suppose, the obvious benefits of open access towards, what you need as an academic. So here's some other ones: Open Access Titles, BMJ, SAGE, Nature Communications. There's also the Open Library of Humanities, and this is a library partnership that's funded. And there's details on that in that LibGuide. Open Door is Directory of Open Access Repositories, and then ROR is a registry of open access repositories. So it's worth having a look around and just seeing, what kind of journals are available open access within your subject area, and then what kind of journals are they? Are they the gold ones? Are they the hybrid ones? Are they pure open access? And then make your kind of decision based on that. Now, another option is you could publish your own journal. So if you find that there isn't a journal that is really suitable for your work or covers your kind of work and you want it to be open access, you could just publish it yourself. It's a lot of work, but it could be worth doing. So here's a couple of examples from Maynooth. So there's the Open Journal of Astrophysics. So Peter Coles looks after that. Journal of Military History and Defence, that's a very new one. Ian Speller looks after that. And they're using the Scholastica and Open Journal system to put those up. And there's also the Journal of Mediation and Applied Conflict Analysis. That's from the Kennedy Institute. They have that available open access. So, it's an increasing thing. It's a trend that people are just creating their own online journals. And I need to say, these would all be high quality. I mean, they're all, rigorously control the quality of the articles. So there's kind of no worries on that front. So why do libraries support open access and publishing? Opportunity to address local needs, promote research. It's going to encourage open access models, permissive licensing, learn a greater volume of high quality open access scholarships. So that's a win-win for everybody, and particularly for libraries when we're always trying to get access to good quality research information for our users. It's giving you greater control how your work is published and disseminated, because obviously you keep the license. Facilitates publication of niche specialized topics, conference proceedings, grey literature, alternative formats. So, you'd often see in institution repositories, there's a huge range of information in there, a lot of different types of articles, and it is an opportunity, say, for, papers to go up that wouldn't be easily accessible in other places. Era of rising subscription prices, cost is always a factor. And expertise of library staff very transferable to local publishing support. So the libraries are keen to get involved in this. So in the future, it's hoped to be more collaborations with academic and university staff interested in open access publishing locally, and an expansion of open publishing activities, more open access journals on Scholastic and other platforms. So it's an area of growth, and the library are interested in developing that. And obviously you're building on knowledge and expertise on campus and around open access publishing, and some possibility of Maynooth academic publishing as a university press. And that is a trend in other universities, and I suppose it is a logical conclusion of this. So just to mention as well in passing, predatory journals. While it's great, there's loads of open access journals out there, on the back of this, a lot of predatory journals have kind of emerged as well. And these are the kind of ones, I won't go into too much detail on it, but they're the kind of the emails you get, after you speak at a conference or you write something, and they very complimentary letter arrives telling you that you're fantastic, they're really keen to publish your work, and they can do it really quickly at a reasonable rate. Okay, and they'll ask you to write articles for them, but you really want to check journals carefully to make sure that they are legitimate and not just looking for free content. Okay, and you kind of spot these anyway. You'd often see maybe they wouldn't look great quality. The emails mightn't be very well thought out. They'll often promise to do it very quickly, publish it very quickly, and of course they'll be looking for money to do that. And they'll probably follow up by asking you to attend conferences and stuff as well, which obviously you have to pay for that as well. So just beware of that. And to check for that, there is a handy tool called Think, Check, Submit, which is quite good. And this helps you identify trusted journals. Okay. There is a Beals list. This is a librarian in America, but he's been kind of banned now. I think there's a legal case against him, so he doesn't update it anymore, but it's still there. It's still obtainable. Ulrich's periodicals directory, you can have a look in there, or check titles on databases like Web of Science and Scopus and EBSCO. Or if you have listings, maybe that your particular subject area, you probably know yourself, like for example, Citation of Business Schools, listings of the top journals in certain fields. You could check those just to make sure that they are compliant. I say just health warning, if people are approaching you, looking for you to publish with them, just make sure that they are a high quality journal. So it's just some other quick issues to consider in deciding where to publish. So visibility, cost, prestige, speed of publication, and subject bias. So visibility. So there's no doubt publishing open access, it will increase your visibility. And studies are showing that there's definitely is going to be higher readership, more downloads, more citations, for open access papers. No question of that. And this particular study, sociology actually had the highest advantage in that case. That's an older study, but still that's quite encouraging. So definitely sciences, social sciences, very definitely are getting the citations. A survey about science and humanities also revealed that the belief that open access are read more widely is the second most common reason for deciding to publish in an open access journal. So, high readership is important. And so there is that bit of uncertainty about downloads translating into citations, but it seems to be clear all the time, and definitely in the sciences. But there's no doubt it will increase your potential collaborations. It's going to democratize research a bit so other people can access it. So in education, the general public, you're getting your ideas out there, which can increase research impetus. It's going to be a boost to knowledge and economy, and it's more immediate access for teachers. So great for teachers to be able to access your work and use it in their teaching. Cost is a worry, as you probably know. I mentioned that already, the whole double dip, where the universities are having to pay to access your journal articles, which you've just submitted for free. But hopefully the open access agreements is mitigating some of that. So just an example, this is a little bit old, it's 2018, but the charges for article processing charges can be quite severe depending on the journal. So, if you have those agreements are covering the journals you're publishing, and that's fantastic, it's a major saving. Now, there are some cases, I'm sure, where, if you have a huge amount of funding, particularly in sciences, you could probably afford as part of your fund to pay these, regardless of whether they're, included in the open access agreements or not. But, the cost is, a huge factor. And these are just journal articles. It's multiples of that if you wanted to publish an open access book or a monograph or that kind of thing. So, cost is a huge factor. So are things changing? So this is just an article here from last year, just saying that there's no doubt these deals are spreading across America, across Europe, so that's all good. But then there's also predictions. This one is just from the open research community, that they kind of expect that this transformative open access agreements will coexist with subscription models. And that's just because it's in the publisher's interest, I suppose. They will, balance these things on how they can make money as well. So there's another little bit there as well, dichotomy between open access and closed access. So both probably will stay, but hopefully, open access will be a lot more significant than it has been in the past. And there's also worries about global inequalities, that the open access deals are highlighting these global inequalities. And that's one of the motivations behind Plan S as well, that there would be a huge inequality in access to scholarly publishing. So the more you can get cost out of this, the better, that there is a danger of a two-tier system, so again, that's just a link in there. You can read that again. I'll be sharing these slides around, but a lot of considerations there. Now, the prestige impact factor, this is one actually you often hear about, where you might feel that you should publish in a certain journal because that is the important one for your career. And then you're worried if you publish open access, maybe that isn't one of those journals. So that's something you'll just have to weigh up. And often actually a concern in the humanities, where there might be, the journal of note that you want to publish in, but it's not necessarily available open access. But I'd say there's more of those, I think, coming on board though now. So open access hopefully will become an option. And measuring the quality of some open access journals can be an issue. So for example, if it's not in Scopus or Web of Science, that kind of hooks into, the journal impact factors, which in turn feed into the kind of university rankings. So if you're concerned that, the journal, if this I want to publish open access, but it's not indexed in Scopus or Web of Science, that's not going to feed into, my department's ranking, the university rankings. Is that an issue? But then there's definitely that correlation between the journals that are, say, in Scopus and Web of Science that are open access, that are a high impact. They tend to be gold open access. So, they will have to have either that, transformative agreement, or somebody will have to pay the article processing charge, if you want to have that combination of open access and high impact in that traditional sense. But again, that's just something you'll have to weigh up, the prestige factor of certain journals. But I think that's something that'll probably wane, as open access increases, but just something that you may need to consider when you're deciding where to publish. And prestige again there. But interesting with that, the likes of the, PLOS and BMC Biology, in 2018, these were ranked 3rd, 4th, and 5th in impact factor. So some of those, so they are gold open access, but they do rank very highly. Now, say with the likes of PLOS, you do have to pay a processing charge, but they do tend to, I think, come to agreements with authors depending on their situation. They can give you a reduced rate and so on. So in that case, definitely open access is not affecting the impact factor at all. Many academics still place importance on brand name journals. There's no doubt about that. There will be certain, especially I suppose early career researchers, they might have their eye on certain journals that they feel they need to be publishing in to get their promotions, tenure, funding, and so on. And again, that's just something you're going to have to just, I suppose, weigh up and see how that works out for you. And it can be subject to arts and humanities with very low journal impact factors, for example. So it mightn't be such an important factor there. And by the way, those are measured usually 2 to 5 years, depending on the database. Okay. Now, Web of Science arts humanities indices will not appear in journal impact factors, so they don't include that actually in their journal impact factors. It may not be necessary to choose between strictly open access and strict traditional journals, such as a hybrid open access journal with a high impact factor may provide the best of both worlds. So no doubt about that. I mean, you can still manage to publish open access and also be in a high impact journal. The two things do work together. It's not a choice of, if I'm going open access, it's going to have to be a lower impact journal. It's not the case at all. It's just trying to get that balance right. And the high visibility of an open access journal combined with the prestige of a well-known traditional journal. So that's the ideal. If you can get that, increased readership, increased downloads, increased citations that the open access will give you, and combine that with the well-known traditional journal, I mean, that's the best, I suppose, position to be in. And these are an example, actually, just in, that one is in Web of Science, just the categories for journal impact factor. So if you're interested in that, you can go into the Web of Science database, or Scopus do as well, and they'll have journal rankings. Now, speed is another issue. Okay, so the turnover of the article, that can affect where people publish as well. Especially the sciences, it's important to get your research out there and quick turnaround. And open access journals, that's often kind of a selling point with them, that unlike, they say, the traditional journal that has a certain print subscription, only publishes so many times a year, open access can get it out much quicker. So you might need to bear that in mind, when you're publishing as well. Okay. So traditional method may have, delays, bundling articles into issues, backlog of published articles due to space limitations, time required to print physical copies of the journal, distribute them, all that kind of stuff. So electronic plus open access is probably going to be the fastest way to get your paper out there. And many journals advertise based on that. Okay. And preprint as well, actually, that's the thing you'd see. And actually Scopus are indexing those now. And that's, the article will be published or will be out there before the final peer review has happened. So, and you would have traditionally seen that a lot in medical sciences, where they just wanted the paper, the work to be out there quick so people could make use of it before the final peer review has gone through. And I say that you would have found that maybe in the likes of PubMed, but you'll see that now in Scopus as well. They'll have preprints being included. So again, just a way of accelerating how your research gets out there. Subject bias, kind of mentioned this a bit. So science is no doubt about it. Open access has a longer history. You know, hybrid open access journals, hybrid journals in biological clinical sciences. It emerged in the sciences. You know, a lot of science areas, they would have done it traditionally anyway. They've done it for a long time. For example, that ARXIV repository, which is mainly, you know, physics, experimental physics, that's a long tradition they have of publishing their work open access. They get higher grant funding, so they can afford to pay gold open access. And science funders are also, you know, demanding open access. So it's more embedded, it's there longer. And also actually very good in this, I didn't put it in there, but very good in social sciences as well. It seems to be working well for them. Humanities would have had less grant funding. So, you know, up to now, that idea of paying an article processing charge wasn't really a runner for them. With the agreements, that's a much better option for them. And traditional journals might be a better option. So learned societies, but again, they might have been, you know, delays in traditional journals maybe getting involved in open access. It's kind of an issue for them. You know, they don't have the big funding of subscription journals, so they have to worry about how do they fund their journal if they decide to make it open access and free. But again, that's something that I think that has been rectified. That journals you know and trust, and that's a big thing in humanities as well. Those traditional journals you want to publish in. There's a lot of monographs, book chapters published. How is that translating to open access? More national language research, again, you know, is the funding there to make that available open access? More independent scholars, you know, they're not all necessarily based in academic institutions. So again, funding being an issue, and less collaboration going on, maybe in the humanities, so, you know, smaller groups. And these are just some of the sources I used for this, if you wanted to check those out. So just to mention as well, before I finish up, there is, you know, a lot of support here in the library on this. So, you know, if you do want to talk to somebody about open access, transformative agreements, impact, all that kind of thing, you know, making those decisions around where to publish and how to publish, do feel free to contact us. So there's guides on it. There's my contact details. You contact me as the research support librarian. We do training events on it as well, different research guides. Okay, and there's a guide for staff here as well. And you know, you can contact us loads of ways to contact me directly, or go into library chat or whatever it happens to be, and you know, the queries will get to me. So I'm happy to help you in any way I can with that.